Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war peace, scare quotes, peace plan update. Actually, I prefer to see it as one German newspaper puts it, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. This is the Trump-Putin pact. So we're going to be talking about some of the emerging details that have come out over the last 24 hours. Absolutely incredible. I think history will look back on this moment with raised eyebrows to see the development of this plan in terms of it being a Russian plan that the Americans have just wholesale taken on. Loads more details coming out with regard to the chaos in the White House, because it seems like the State Department did have no idea about this and now scrabbling around trying to claim that they did have involvement, so on and so forth. We're going to get into long weeds of that, but before we do so, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. As you can see there in the corner, it really helps out the channel. Okay, let's get into the details of the peace plan. Right, we already know here that it can be seen, I think, more accurately as a Putin-Trump pact. Let's remind ourselves what Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary for the White House, said 2 days ago.
Sure. Go ahead.
On Ukraine, you said this is a good plan. So according to our sources, this proposal demands major concessions from Ukraine and doesn't demand much from Russia. So was Russia involved in drafting
Your
this?
understanding is wrong. Have you read the full plan?
So I won't go on any further than that. So the question is, so according to our sources, it wasn't really a question, she was interrupted. This proposal demands major concessions of Ukraine and doesn't demand much from Russia. Caroline Leavitt says, your understanding is wrong. Have you read the full plan? Well, I don't think anyone actually contests the position that it demands major concessions of Ukraine and none from Russia. Has Caroline Leavitt read the plan? So that's the position a couple of days ago. It is getting so much more pushback now that I'm wondering whether actually there might be a bit of a climb down from Trump and Witkoff, or whether they're going to double down. Now, the key of independent, and this is one of the emerging, although this is rather speculative, one of the emerging, well, I don't know speculative, but it depends on, you know, how much you trust sources and whatnot. One of the emerging issues around the provenance of the peace plan and what happened in the White House and what is happening in the White House with regard to different entities vying for, I guess, supremacy or vying for that narrative. The key of independent has reported, and I'm going to go to Chris Owicki to summarize this because he's done it pretty well, is reporting that Trump envoy Steve Witkoff is, quote, running a shadow operation inside the White House in an effort to sideline pro-Ukraine officials. Cutting out, end quote, cutting out Secretary of State Marco Rubio. We're going to return to that idea in an effort supported by Vice President J.D. Vance. So Marco Rubio is an old school anti-Russia, you know, typical Republican who has been, I think, not so much poisoned as his true political views have been either ignored, or he's been sidelined, or he's towed the party line, but he doesn't really believe much of what the full Trump administration espouses and what he's forced to go along with. Anyway, according to sources quoted by the Kyiv Independent, Witkoff is, quote, running a broader operation with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev, trying to sideline the pro-Ukrainian voices in the Trump administration, end quote. An unnamed White House communications official, quote, is seen as one of Witkoff's people, feeding media talking points favorable to Witkoff and his Russia-friendly approach. Now, according to the source, the White House is a, quote, a mess of competing factions, each trying to present their version of events as the official administration line. That is totally what I've been saying for the last month now, where you've got at least these two different worldviews, the establishment, I guess, political, military view that Russia are the bad guys, Ukraine are the good guys here, and that they need to support Ukraine. And then you've got the isolationist Project 2025 pro-Russian lot who believes something completely different. And Trump kind of oscillates between the two somewhat because it depends who he listens to. And there is this battle going on, not so much in the White House, but in the government as a whole, as to which worldview has prominence. And at the moment, over the last 48 hours, it looks like that Project 2025 Isolationist Heritage Foundation pro-Russian worldview has gained dominance and is fully aligned with Kirill Dmitriev and the Russians. Now, this is exactly what is being talked about here by the Kyiv Independents, that the White House is a, quote, mess of competing factions, each trying to present their version of events as the official administration line. Well, now, although White House spokesperson Caroline Levitt has claimed that Witkoff and Rubio have been working together on the proposed peace plan, this is said to be untrue. We're going to get into the details of that now. The Kyiv Independent says that according to, quote, a high-ranking US official who spoke on condition of anonymity, the current plan is supported by US Vice President J.D. Vance, with other top US officials, including Rubio, cut out of the negotiating process. That seems entirely not just plausible, but very, very probable. J.D. Vance is part of that isolationist Project 2025 worldview. Marco Rubio is part of the other worldview. So John Sopel, the former US correspondent for the BBC, now with LBC and the news agents, says this thread is a must read. The conclusion is simultaneously eye-popping and utterly predictable. The peace plan, scare quotes, peace plan for Ukraine delivered by the White House seems to have been translated from Russian into English. In other words, it's the Kremlin plan that Trump seems to be passing off as American and is telling Ukraine it must accept. Now, The Guardian first sort of talked about this with regard to Luke Harding looking at some Russianisms in the peace plan, and he suggested that it looked like it was a Russian plan that had been Google translated. Now Megan Mobbs, who is, I think, either the daughter or granddaughter, I forget, of Keith Kellogg, who is going to be stepping down as the envoy to Ukraine in the new year. Now she is pretty much pro-Trump, I think because she has to be broadly, but is super pro-Ukraine because she works in Kiev. She says, I uploaded verified images of the peace document to Grok. So that's the AI model on Twitter. I prompted, quote, analyze this document from a logistic perspective. It is in English, but assess whether or not it has been translated. If so, what is the likely language of the original? So she's not leading Grok in terms of what is the language here. Grok then goes for it. And this is what Grok finds. And she quotes some of its conclusion. This document is almost certainly translated from Russian into English by a native Russian speaker or a non-professional translator. It is not originally written in English. The combination of transliteration errors, Curzon, Zaporizhia, so it's spelt wrong, Russian bureaucratic phrasing and political vocabulary leaves no realistic doubt about the original language being Russian. The text strongly resembles the style of Russian Foreign Ministry or Kremlin internal draft proposals that have circulated since 2022 to 2024, especially the March to April 2022 Istanbul draft and later Russian, scare quotes, peace initiatives. So Megan Mobbs then says this raises some potentially very serious and very dangerous questions. Who actually authored this plan and under whose direction or influence was it initially produced? For what purpose was a Russian language document repackaged into English and presented as official American policy? Who understood the plan's true provenance? Who was it concealed from? Why was it concealed? Why was this conducted without interagency coordination? Who stands to benefit the most from this plan? Why is this being done so hastily? And unfortunately, like, she's so pro-Trump, but the result is going to be that Trump is, and J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff are all beholden to the Kremlin. And this is a case of marionettes, puppeteers, and so on. Really good thread though from Megan Mobbs, absolutely nailing it. Grok coming to some functional utility there. Right, so Aaron Parnas here says, let's quickly recap the past 3 hours. So this was actually this morning, very early morning UK time, so it would have been late afternoon maybe, or late evening US time. Let's quickly recap the past 3 hours. Republican and Democratic senators say Marco Rubio told them the 28-point plan was a Russian document, not an American plan. Okay, so, and we're going to get into this. So Marco Rubio appears to have said that actually, rather like Meghan Mobbs has shown there and Luke Harding in The Guardian, that this was a Russian document. Marco Rubio says that this was a Russian document and not an American plan. Then the State Department says that the senators are lying. So the senators say that Rubio said this. The State Department has to come out and then claim that the senators are lying. What a complete mess. Okay, right. More details of the Marco Rubio situation, as Ron Filakowski from the Midas Touch Network says, what a shit show. Everyone could see this plan was written by the Kremlin, adopted by Witkoff and Trump, who demanded Ukraine accept it by this Thursday. After a firestorm of objections by Europe and Republican senators, it appears Rubio wants to distance himself from it. Okay. So Marco Rubio now denies the US had any input into the savage 28-point peace plan to Ukraine, says it's from Russia. But Axios reporters Barak Ravid and David Lawler, who were leaked the plan, claimed it was written by the US, by Steve Witkoff and Marco Rubio. So when this was leaked originally, and the argument is it was leaked by Kirill Dmitriev, the Russian envoy there. This was claimed by Steve Witkoff, who wrote this on Twitter, but deleted it because thought it was a private message. He put it out there saying, I think this was leaked by Kay. So like I've said to you before, it seems it was written by the Russians, pushed in front of Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff, who's pro-Russian anyway, either gave it the green light there or showed it to Trump, who's also pro-Russian by default. See what Adam Kinzinger was saying to Tim Miller yesterday on the Bulwark. That was a good little snippet where he was like, he just returns to the default of being pro-Russian. Trump, that is. So the idea was this was leaked by Kirill Dmitriev and forced the US's hand there. Then it comes out to people like Marco Rubio who'd not seen this. And then they have to scrabble around and build up a narrative to give an understanding of what's going on here. Yet essentially, it appears that Russia is forcing America's hand and forcing America to the US to say that, yeah, this is our plan because it was leaked, even though it wasn't actually formalized as a plan. So this is what Axios originally wrote. Catch up quick. The plan was drafted by Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, with input from Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Witkoff also consulted with Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev on the plan. And then it goes on to say Dmitriev told Axios he is optimistic about it because, unlike past efforts, we feel the Russian position is really being heard. Of course, it's being heard because they wrote that plan. Anyway, fascinating stuff. If we continue here, now that Rubio is contradicting Axios's reporting, it would be nice for them to own up about who gave them the draft and why they said it was written by the US. Witkoff himself posted accidentally that he thought it was leaked by Dmitriev of Russia. More senators reiterate Marco Rubio now says the Ukraine peace plan is in fact a Russian wish list and not a US plan. But Axios reported the opposite on November the 19th and 20th. Is Rubio lying? Was Axios lying, or was Axios just fooled? I think the latter is more appropriate. They owe us an answer. And then a correction here. Axios first reported their leak on November the 18th, not the 19th. They called it 28-point US plan, citing unnamed Russian and US officials. But now the US Secretary of State denies it's from the US at all. Lesson: don't print motivated leaks from anonymouses. Don't be fooled. This is to Axios. US senators now say that Axios is lying. They say not only is it not our peace plan, but also that Russia leaked it. We did not release it. It was not released by our members. So what does Axios have to say? And then finally here, this source says, well, now Rubio is back to saying the US wrote the surrender plan. So the senators are lying, and Axios says they didn't see the document until after reporting details with titles like Between the Lines. So it wasn't a leak. Someone really briefed them, so on and so forth. So there's absolute chaos going on here. Now, what everyone seems to be referring to is this statement by Senator Rounds, who's, I think, a South Dakota Republican senator. So, it needs to be taken fairly seriously. It's coming from the Republican side of things, although also I think Angus Young was involved in the statement in Halifax here. So anyway, after talking to Secretary Marco Rubio, Senator Rounds announces that the 28-point peace plan was a Russian document, not a US document. So this is what Rounds said. Marco Rubio did make a phone call to us this afternoon. So this is an actual claim from Senator Rounds about Marco Rubio. So either, if Marco Rubio is going to deny this, either Rounds is lying and the people that the phone call was to. It wasn't just Rounds, it was us. So either they are lying or Rubio is lying. Rubio did make a phone call to us this afternoon. I think he made it very clear to us that we are the recipients of a proposal that was delivered to one of our representatives. It was not our recommendation. It is not our peace plan. It is a proposal that was received. And as an intermediary, we have made arrangements to share it. And we did not release it. It was leaked. It was not released by our members or our representatives. This is an opportunity to receive it, and that it has been utilized and delivered to the Ukrainians, and that they will have an opportunity to respond. And in doing so, you now have one side being presented and the opportunity for the other side to respond. In other words, this wasn't devised by the Americans. This was the Russians presenting it to the Americans being intermediaries, and then delivering that to Ukraine, and Ukraine then getting a chance to respond to completely the other side. So you start over here. One side starts over here, the other side starts over here, and you meet somewhere in the middle. That's how normal negotiations work, whether you're like haggling over something in a marketplace in a foreign country or international peace negotiations. But the problem here is that it was leaked, and the claim was this was developed by the Americans and the Russians, so that this point over here is actually not just the other side, but it's actually where the Americans think it should be, type thing. And that means you're much more likely not to meet in the middle, but meet somewhere very close to what these two nations are saying, because then America's saying, if you don't sign this by next Thursday, you're going to be punished by America. So this is not a classic negotiation. This is absolutely outrageous. Now, Marco Rubio here said the peace proposal was authored by the US. So he's come back and then said this is in contradiction to what Senator Rounds has just said. It is offered as a strong framework for ongoing negotiations. It is based on input from the Russian side. But look at the language here. But it is also based on previous and ongoing input from Ukraine. I couldn't help thinking, but previous as in the way I could interpret that is that actually it was just the Russians developing this with maybe some American input, or maybe it's delivered to the Americans. A previous input is like we knew what the Ukrainians were thinking from previous talks to them, and now it's got ongoing input going forward from now, because the Ukraine isn't necessarily involved because it's been leaked. But I think you could get away with saying actually this thing had absolutely no actual Ukrainian inputs at the time of its being developed. Now, OSINT Defender here says, following several days of outrage by both Democrats and Republicans in Congress over the 28-point peace agreement for Ukraine, claimed to have been written jointly by senior officials from the US and Russia, Republican Senator Mike Rounds announced tonight, after speaking with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, that the proposal being circulated was a document written by the Russians, not the United States. Senator Angus King stated that the leaked plan, which was allegedly provided by the White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff by officials claimed to be representing Russia, was essentially a wish list of demands by Russia and not the position of the Trump administration. Neither Rounds, King, nor any other senator appeared to understand why it took the administration over 3 days to make clear the 28-point peace plan was not the policy being pushed by the US State Department. Republican senators on the delegation to Halifax stated that they were also told by Secretary Rubio that he was unaware of any ultimatum provided to Ukraine requiring their agreement to the ceasefire plan before Thanksgiving, with the threat of pulling material and intelligence support from Kiev. So apparently Marco Rubio also said he was completely unaware of the threat of Thanksgiving ultimatum and pulling back support for Ukraine. Wow. Jimmy Russian, security analyst, says this is exactly what my contacts in the US at the US State Department told me 2 days ago. Nobody has seen the document. Nobody was even aware that it existed until it was reported by Axios. This is kind of the idea that, yes, it was leaked by Russia before there was any interagency interaction there. and the State Department had no idea. Michael Weiss, the journalist, says Rubio, earlier reported to have been part of cobbling together this plan, had nothing to do with it and hadn't even seen the document, per US officials cited by Reuters. Rubio is now en route to Geneva to try and fight some fire with Europeans here who are completely pissed off with the whole situation. So here's a quote from a news source. Many senior officials inside the State Department and on the National Security Council were not briefed. The two people familiar with the plan said. Special Envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, who had been working with the Ukrainians on negotiating the end of the war and plans to step down in January, was also cut out of talks led by Steve Witkoff and Dmitriev, they said. One senior US official said Secretary of State Marco Rubio was read in on the 28-point plan, but didn't clarify when he was briefed. Quote, Rubio has been closely involved throughout the entire process of developing a plan to end the war in Ukraine. Any insinuation otherwise is completely false. That includes speaking with both sides of this conflict many times to facilitate the exchange of ideas to establish a durable peace, said State Department Principal Deputy Spokesperson Timothy Pigott in a statement. US officials and others consulted by Reuters disputed that characterization. Quote, there was no coordination. No one at State had seen this, not Rubio, another US official said. The official added that the plan contains material that the Secretary of State basically had not been involved in, etc., etc. Okay, so then Marco Rubio's come out and said the peace proposal was authored by the US. It is offered as a strong framework for ongoing negotiations. It is based on input from the Russian side, but it is also based on previous and ongoing input from Ukraine. So there's this kind of walking back, as I've already mentioned. It can be understood like this. To sum it up, says Robbie Gramer, plan leaks. US confirms the plan is real. Some senators condemn the plan. Senators say Rubio calls them. He denies it's a real plan. White House then denies that denial. And Rubio says, yes, it is a real starting plan. And now Rounds has issued a statement after the White House and State basically accused him and the other two senators of lying about Rubio's call. And Senator Mike Rounds has subsequently said, I appreciate Secretary Rubio briefing us earlier today on the efforts to bring about peace by relying on input from both Russia and Ukraine to arrive at a final deal. In other words, yeah, I don't know if people are then now having to toe the party line. I assume there is just absolute chaos in the White House. Now, it gets even more fascinating that Russian officials, according to the Institute for the Study of War and the media, are setting conditions to reject the US 28-point peace plan, which is their own peace plan, right? With State Duma members insisting any settlement must meet Russia's full demands, including addressing alleged root causes of the war. So now what Russia might be doing is, I said, look, Russia starts here, Ukraine starts over here, but Russia starting over here is actually the US starting over here. So it's not just Russia, Ukraine meet in the middle. This is a US plan. It's leaked and we forced it to become this US plan. So then instead of having this spectrum, we now move the spectrum this way so that this over here, the Russia plan as it was, the Russia position in this spectrum, if we shift the whole thing this way, now Russia is saying, actually, this is a US plan, and we think this should be the starting point. Oh my goodness. So then if you're going to meet in the middle, it's going to be even more over to what Russia want. So Russian officials are saying that any settlement must meet Russia's full demands, including addressing root causes. So the root causes, of course, is a demilitarization of Ukraine, as was included in the 28-point plan, but also the denazification, which is their way of saying get rid of the government. Now, they've called the stipulation was in the 28-point plan, 100 days, and there must be an election. But this is going back to like going to town in a maximalist way on Ukraine. Pretty incredible if that is indeed the case. Now, there's been an awful lot of pushback, including people on the streets. Hundreds of people who disagree with the policies of the US President Trump took to the streets of Washington. And we have some people standing up for Ukraine, but also just calling out Trump anyway. Please pass the Russian dressing, says Putin, having a Thanksgiving dinner with Trump. And the Thanksgiving turkey is Zelenskyy himself on this placard. Stop Trump from carving up Ukraine is a placard there. And, lots of people just not happy about this. Those are people on the streets. But then we have Donald Tusk from Poland being, I think, really on the nose here. As Tendar says, the opening of Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk in reference to the 28-point paper is quite something. This is trolling on the most professional level politics can give. It is even questionable whether the US side will be understanding this subtlety. Hilarious. What did Donald Tusk say? Quote, Donald Tusk, Twitter. Together with the leaders of Europe, Canada, and Japan, we have declared our readiness to work on a 28-point plan, despite some reservations. However, before we start our work, it would be good to know for sure who is the author of the plan and where it was created. Ouch. And that goes back to everything we've just been discussing. Hillary Clinton gets involved. With this ultimatum that Ukraine surrender to Russia, Trump finally wins a prize, the Neville Chamberlain Award for portraying peace, freedom, and justice. Ow. And actually, some people calling out that's a bit of an unfair position on Chamberlain. Some people are saying this is worse than Chamberlain by a country mile, the way that this is developing. Now, Tim White says this is worth reading. He said my bedtime reading is a mega long post on Twitter from Estonia's former intelligence chief. So this is Eric Cross. He worked out that Steve Witkoff's surrender plan contains 150% more violations than points drawn up by Dmitriev. Sorry, I mean the White House, or maybe not. Right. So he hasn't screenshotted it all, but this is well worth looking at. Eric Cross says, spent my Saturday analyzing the 28-point plan. The result, if the US is seriously considering enforcing this plan, it would place itself in violation of 13 binding treaties and international instruments, 23 political commitments, declarations, and authoritative resolutions, 35 explicit articles, clauses, and legal principles. In total, that is 71 separate international legal or political obligations. Full analysis below, and keep in mind that even this list is far from exhaustive. It's just, and he goes on to list all the ways in which the 28-point peace plan is in contravention of international rules and norms and instruments and articles and clauses and legal principles and resolutions and declarations and commitments. It is that bad. Okay. General Kellogg, though, who has been sidelined, wasn't involved. His daughter, granddaughter, whoever it is, Meghan Mobbs, his relative, coming out and saying, how terrible the peace plan is. Well, Keith Kellogg has obviously been read the Riot Act and is now coming out to talk about how, it's a good starting point.
I just think on the end state, and I think the framework is there to come to a conclusion. It's not going to be up to the Russians to accept it. I think we can drive the Ukrainians to it. And I think we can drive the Russians to it later on as well with the president and Putin. So overall, I understand what she is saying. I hear what she is saying. I hear what Zelenskyy said on Friday when he spoke to the nation. It's part of their posturing. I've got that. But they've got some hard decisions to make. This war's got to be brought to an end. I just think...
I think the phrasing there is interesting. He says, we're going to drive the Ukrainians to accept it, and then as an afterthought, he said, and I think we can drive the Russians to it later on as well. But it's all about driving the Ukrainians first to it. So this is all about, even from Keith Kellogg's point of view, taking a Russian approach. Absolutely outrageous. Now, the Wall Street Journal's editorial board has torched Trump's Ukraine, scare quotes, peace plan, saying, quote, appeasing Mr. Putin would haunt the rest of his presidency. If Mr. Trump thinks American voters hate war, wait until he learns how much they hate dishonor. Mr. Trump can tarnish his legacy if he wants, but the bigger risk here is to the United States. A bad deal in Ukraine would broadcast to US enemies that they can seize what they want with force or nuclear blackmail, or by pressing on until America loses interest. The odds of a Pacific crisis will go up. 100% agreement from me. Now, here, Donald Trump perhaps walking it back a tad.
Is the Ukraine plan problematic? Is this your final offer to Ukraine?
No.
Okay, so because, again, they're having a conversation under a jet or under a helicopter, she says, is a peace plan problematic? Is this your final offer to Ukraine?
No, not by far.
And in case you didn't catch it, no, not by far. So actually, he's saying no. He's now, and as he should, go, no, this is just an opening gambit. It can be moved, quite a long way. This is not by far the final offer.
I would like to get the peace. It should have happened a long time ago. The Ukraine war with Russia should have never happened. If I were president, it's
blah blah blah, and same old bullshit that you hear from him every single day. It's just very tiring. It's like a stuck record. So then we also hear, and I don't know that I've got this on. Yeah, I haven't got this on audio or video, but it's staggering. I mean, honestly, if I was Zelenskyy, I would want to punch Trump full in the face here. Reporter asked Trump, what happens if Zelenskyy doesn't agree to your peace plan? Trump said, then he can continue to fight his little heart out. So this war in Ukraine is Zelenskyy fighting his little heart out. Oh, you can fight your little heart out, mate. If you don't agree to our plan, which is Putin's plan, you can just carry on and fight your little heart out, matey. As a Kiev Independent says, Trump says new US peace plan is not the final offer to Ukraine. And if President Volodymyr Zelenskyy refuses to accept the terms of the 28-point plan, then he can continue to fight his little heart out. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. So the US delegation plans a quick meeting with Russians over the Trump plan. Oh, by the way, so actually, let's go back to, I just want to give you a synopsis of how I've lost it now. So this is, I'm going to have to find it. It's Tendar. Yeah, so I actually forgot to read through Tendar's synopsis of how it happened, because I think this is important. This is speculation. It appears that somebody instructed Marco Rubio to go along with the story unfolding, and it looked to me that this resulted from the following chain of events. I will lay it out here. Everything points to the direction that Witkoff and Dmitriev were hammering out this 28-point surrender paper without informing the US Secretary of State or the Ukrainian government. It contains primarily Russian wishes and unrealistic Russian demands, but Witkoff basically took them over in the list. Kirill was then leaking this Russian wish list to Axios, well knowing that what it is. Witkoff basically confirmed the intent followed two objectives. First, maximalist wish lists of the Russian should be engraved cognitively in the media sphere for everyone before any pushback occurred. Two, it should test the US government how it would react to the backlash, which will inevitably follow. Rubio is unaware of the contents of the talks, was then confronted by a bipartisan group of US senators and gave them his answer, which at that moment was truthful. The senators then went public, quoting Rubio, "It's not our recommendation, it is not our peace plan." At this point, US officials in the Trump administration must have started to realize that something is going wrong. As intended, the leak totally blindsided them. They completely lost control of the situation, but begrudgingly decided to go along with it. Rubio was then compelled to go public and claim that it was indeed the plan, while watering down yet is just the Russian side. With some previous input from the Ukrainian side. This is my assumption based on facts I see so far, it says this German analyst. This whole episode reveals that the current US negotiation team is completely out of its depth, and that the people involved in these scare quotes negotiations are absolute amateurs, to say the least. Ukraine is well advised to push back hard and not leave any doubts that this surrender paper is dead in the water by countering it with a new peace proposal. So anyway, yeah, completely agree that that's the seeming chronology of events. Now, then we get on to what's going forward with regard to Europe, and indeed here with the US. US delegation plans a quick meeting with the Russians. So they're going to meet with the Russians. There were some claims that American generals were going to be going to Moscow soon. A meeting between Russian and American delegations to discuss the proposed peace plan has already been scheduled, which will take place quickly, but it won't take place in Geneva. Geneva is the location today where the Europeans are meeting the Americans. I think Marco Rubio is on the way to that. Leaders' statement on Ukraine. So this is what the European leaders said in the European Council of the European Union statement, press release. We are clear on the principle that borders must not be changed by force. We're also concerned by the proposed limitations on Ukraine's armed forces, which would leave Ukraine vulnerable to future attack. We reiterate that the implementation of elements relating to the European Union and relating to NATO would need the consent of the EU and NATO members respectively. We take this opportunity to underline the strength of our continued support to Ukraine. And that statement was adopted by Presidents Costa and von der Leyen, Prime Minister Carney of Canada, President Stubb of Finland, Macron, Martin, Meloni, Takaichi, and Schoof, Sanchez, Starmer, Merz, and Storer. So loads of big hitters there. saying essentially you can't make decisions involve the EU and NATO without the EU and NATO consent. So what are you doing in the United States? So Europeans have already formulated apparently a new plan, taking their own proposals for the Trump plan to negotiations in Switzerland. The document contains 3 main provisions apparently. This is coming from Max 25. No restrictions are imposed on the armed forces of Ukraine. Ukraine restores control over the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the Kakhovka Dam, receives crossings across Dnipro, and control of the over the Kinburn Spit. Interesting. Other territorial issues will be considered after the ceasefire. Wow. And so still kind of making concessions territorially for sure. The EU, according to Politico, also is to participate in the Geneva talks. As mentioned, the EU and UK will participate in high-level talks on Trump's peace plan for Ukraine, which will begin today. This will be a significant breakthrough for Brussels and London, which have been excluded from the process until now. And then here we have Budanov saying, and I think this is well worth kind of talking about, and honestly, this should be presented to the American White House, to the White House and Trump. I'd love a question about this. A question about this being given to Trump. So we understand from Budanov, Kirill Budanov, the Ukrainian intelligence chief, saying Russian General Oleg Makarovich, who ordered the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant to be blown up, has headed a rotating advisory mission in Venezuela. More than 120 Russian military personnel are training Venezuelan forces. So we have the Americans, as a result of Trump's Project 2025 administration, posturing in the Caribbean, ready to attack Venezuela and be involved in a war with Venezuela. So it's clear that the Americans see the Venezuelans as the enemy. And yet the Venezuelans are being explicitly trained by the Russians as a result of that posturing by the Americans. So essentially, the Russians are allied with Venezuela, which we knew anyway. But here's now potentially tangible evidence that in a kind of very tangible way, in a very kind of almost kinetic way, the Russians are helping the Venezuelans to combat the US, and at the same time, the US is siding with Russia to hammer home a scare quotes peace plan, a surrender plan for Ukraine, wanting to be essentially on the same side as Russia, the Americans. This bit of information here should be used as leverage to against the Americans here, or as a really big talking point to make sure that the Trump administration recognize which side the Russians are really on here. And it's not the American side. And I'm going to leave you with what really should be the negotiating position from the
way out of the
by the
conflict.
former
out of the conflict.
by the former Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin here, who just says it so pithily and so concisely.
Way out of the conflict.
Way out of the conflict. The way out of the conflict is to Russia to leave Ukraine. That's the way out of the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I've got to say. I'll tell you what the way out of the conflict is. Russia F's off. You just get out of Dodge. Unbelievable. So there you go. I think that it's going to be an interesting couple of days, and I do hope that Ukraine and Europe, together with allies, really pushes back on the United States, and that this 28-point peace plan isn't taken as the center point. As I was explaining, it's getting pushed to the center point, but should be taken as the most extreme Russian set of maximalist demands. If you let them go even further to the other side, that's ridiculous. This should not be anywhere near the final agreement. Essentially, it is outrageous that 28-point plan has been put forward by the Americans as having anything to do with them. It should be an embarrassment to them, and the chaos that has emerged in the White House and developed over the last couple of days, I think, is symptomatic of an American government that is including these different worldviews and where left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And I hope that sense will prevail. But who knows? It is so volatile, the White House these days. Who knows how this will turn out? Anyway, that's enough for me. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.